influential persons, individuals who can control communication, who can bridge distinct parts of the network. Closing centrality is again about potential to control communication, but it tells us something about how well connected the individual is with other actors in the network. And finally, another interesting concept that you can also see a lot in educational research is eigenvalue centrality. This centrality measure actually tells us to how well I'm connected with the most influential nodes in the observed network. So why those centrality measures are actually important? Well, the fact is that most influential research in social network analysis that applies social network analysis actually considers that more central positions bring certain benefits. So those who have higher centrality measures like either degree or primarily focusing between the centrality are considered to have certain advantages compared to other nodes in the network. So there are two most commonly applied theories when we analyze social networks in either educational or any other context. The first one is Gašević's work on strength of weak ties. So he basically assumed that those who are not those acquaintances that are less likely to be the main argument behind Gašević's theory is that those connections that we have outside our, let's say, most closely connected friends give us certain advantages and give us more opportunities to extend our, to reach further and to gain some benefits from those, as he calls, weak ties. And the main argument here is that weak ties are actually those, this type of ties that brings us advantages. So it's not that strong ties, because if we are strongly connected with individual in our environment, there is a higher chance that our connections will be also highly connected, but we are looking for weak ties that actually bring us some potential benefit. So the thing is, he proved this theory on analyzing job search, and he's definitely one of the most influential works in social network analysis. And another work of Bert that goes pretty much along the same lines, and Bert observed structural holes. Those structural holes are actually those gaps, let's say, communication between individuals who have complementary source of information. So Bert further argues, he goes even further from Gašević. He says it's not that tie has to be of certain type or certain strength. We don't talk about strong or weak ties. It's important that this tie bridges between two otherwise distinct parts of the system. As long as this tie bridges two distinct parts of the system, it must have some, it implies that this node will have a more advantageous position. So for example, here we see that node A should probably have better position than node D in a given settings. In educational research, there are many studies trying to assess the association between different centrality measures and either cognitive learning outcomes or final grade or course satisfaction, higher sense of belonging to groups. Here we focus particularly on final learning outcome. In this study, we talk about obtaining a certificate in a MOOC. So what do we know from the existing research that actually applies SNA to assess the association between different centrality measures and either course grade or any other outcome as defined in those studies? So for example, we know that Russo and Kosten show that there is a positive association between in-degree and cognitive learning outcome. We see that, for example, Gašević and al. Show that, and colleagues show that there is positive and significant association between closeness and argument centrality and GPA, but there is no association between degree and between centrality. We also have 2 courses analyzed in a single study by Young and colleagues. So what I found is that degree centrality was positively associated and between centrality was positively associated with the course grade in one of the courses, but nothing was significant in the other courses they analyzed. So basically, if you consider that Professor Gašević is my supervisor, this might imply that other researchers were wrong. Or there could be something that we missed. There could be there's probably something that we need to observe in order to have more, to have better interpretation of the association between centrality measures and learning outcome. It seems like there is something that tells us in certain structures it might be important, but in some other situations it might not be important. So that brings us to Krafthart's work, who says that, yes, Bert told us that if someone has a central position network, that will definitely imply certain advantages, but he said that might not be the case always. He builds his argument on Siemens' theory of social interaction. Siemens' theory of social interaction is slightly different than other theories. It's not that people are inherently motivated to form cliques. Siemens says that once cliques are formed, they will continue to persist and to, let's say, reject any changes. So they will become stronger over time. Becoming stronger, they will develop what Krafthart calls super strong or similian ties. Basically, what his argument is all about, if you are trying to bridge between 2 groups that are connected with super strong ties, that probably means that you will not have, you might not benefit always from such a position. He had an example. So Krafthart applied his work in organizing roles in institutions. So he said that if you are trying to brokerage information or to make some influence between 2 departments that are very well connected and that have some patterns of interaction, you will not be able to change their patterns just because you're outside, you're between 2 departments. That doesn't mean that you will have any power to change anything between these 2 groups. So you are central in the organization, you have opportunity to collaborate with all of them, but these two groups are connected with super strong ties, and they simply do not allow any influence. They just don't want to change their patterns of interaction. So what Simon further argues is that moving forward from Bert and Granovetter, who mostly focused on dyads, that is on the 2 individuals connected, Simon said that we should observe triads, that is cliques made of 3 nodes. So why? It's not just we have 3 nodes compared to 2, but he argues that triads are qualitatively different than dyads. So if you have 2 individuals connected, they can break this connection anytime they want. But if you have group and you have certain patterns, there are certain rules that everyone has to obey. So if you're in the group, it's much harder for you to break out this group. And if you leave, group will continue to exist. So that was his main argument why triads actually should be the main unit of analysis when we analyze social networks. And also the importance of contextual factors. When Simon talks about that there is no inherent motivation to form a clique, he also says that those interaction patterns, those ways how we communicate with each other depend basically on those third others who interact with us, those other nodes who are actually in our social network. So what was the main idea behind this research? We wanted to to assess different social dynamical processes in two different networks, and to see whether there are any, if there are some different social dynamical processes, whether there will be a difference in association between social centrality and learning outcome. Here we were particularly interested to see whether there is propensity to force similian or those super strong ties in any of the two networks analyzed, and how those, if we assess that there are different configurations of network, is there any impact on the association between centrality and academic performance. So we took a Coursera course. Basically, this is one course delivered in two different languages, English and Spanish. So we had slightly different population, twice as double enrolled in the English version of the course, but here we can see that almost the same number of students graduated, obtained the certificate in those two courses. So yes, we had twice as many enrolled in the English version of the course, but still the same number of those who obtained a certificate, either normal or with distinction. So that gave us a clue that there might be something in the way the students interacted within the course. Here, we focused on discussion forum to extract weighted directed graph. So we did the most commonly used method of just who replied to whom. There would be, if I replied to one of my colleagues, there would be an edge between us. If we interacted several times, we would add weights to this edge. So the idea was to enrich this descriptive network analysis and to support it with statistical network analysis to provide the context for interpretation of the association between centrality measures and course outcome. Here we define course outcome as an obtained certificate, either normal with distinction or none. We were particularly interested to see what is the propensity to form ties between students with the same achievement, like with those who obtain normal or distinction or who didn't obtain certificate, where they tend to interact more within those groups. We also wanted to see, yes, since we had two languages, we also wanted two different, basically, versions of the same course. We wanted to see whether there is a propensity to form ties between domestic students and guest students. We defined domestic and guest, so one of the courses was delivered here at the University of Edinburgh, so UK students would be domestic. All other students would be guests. And also gender. Finally, we also examined some of the most commonly used metrics in the social networks, like reciprocity, popularity, and expansiveness. And finally, we also were particularly interested to see whether any of these networks, where the students in any of these networks tend to form similar cliques. What's also important when we talk about ties in this particular context, Granovetter framed his work in different contexts, job search, and he talked about friends, he talked about family. Then again, Krathardt, he talked about analyzing roles in an organization. So, of course, there are different types of ties. Here we talk about interaction in a discussion forum. So, if someone communicates if two students communicate very often then with other students in the course, and that continues from week to week, we consider that tie a strong tie. Here we applied exponential random graph models to analyze social dynamical processes in both networks. And one thing that makes difference between these two networks is propensity to form super strong ties in an English version of the course. So all other metrics, for example, popularity, these are all in line with existing research, and between those courses they're quite similar. Even reciprocity to form ties, it's quite similar, but there is only this one particular property that's different between these two networks. So it turns out that in the English version of the course, students tend to form those cliques that stick together throughout the course and interact more often than with other students. So what does it mean? So this gives us a context for further analysis. So we see that there is something different, but what does it mean in terms of comparing centrality, that is position network, and learning outcome? Here we also applied we further applied multinomial regression analysis, just to see, to simply assess whether there is association or not between centrality measures and outcome. We don't talk here about direction, although we probably could, but we don't talk about specific direction. We talk whether there is or no association between position network and learning outcome. What we see is that all three centrality measures observed, that is weighted degree, that is just same as degree centrality, but since we had weighted network, we applied weighted degree. Closeness and betweenness, they are all significant, and they all imply, if you have, in this particular example, higher centrality means better learning outcome. In the network that did not have super strong ties. However, in the network that had super strong ties, in the English version of the course, there is only weighted degree was significant, but actually the only thing that was significant is distinction between not obtaining certificate and obtaining certificate with distinction. Nothing else was statistically significant in the English version of the course. So what does it mean, and what are some of the conclusions? Well, first we saw that those two networks are different with respect to with the determinants that form network structure in both settings, in Spanish and English version of the course. So it seems that those differences actually affect the association between social centrality and learning outcome. So we cannot just take, what's the main message? We cannot just observe social centrality, say, yeah, it might be important, it might not be important. We need also to take into account those contextual factors when we talk about the importance of certain centrality measures. So we need to see what are the underlying processes that drive network formation in order to be able to provide certain recommendation or to drive certain conclusions based on someone's centrality to the network. And we tend to agree with Kracher that social centrality does not necessarily imply benefits in given settings. So we talk these days a lot about temporal dynamics and everything. So that's one of the things we are currently working on. This particular study observed cross-sectional. It's kind of cross-sectional analysis. We just observed network at the end of the course. We want to see how these processes evolve over time, what happens from one week to another, or maybe even more fine-grained. We are also working on incorporating content and analysis with social network analysis to see how those topics within given cliques differ from other topics that emerge in the course. And in line with that is also whether there is any association, whether students with similar language profiles tend to connect more often than with different profiles. We did some initial analysis on that, and we found certain interesting patterns, but I guess that's part of the ongoing research. And of course, I really hope that you enjoyed the conference, and I would like to use this chance to invite you to join us in Michigan at the Learning Analytics Summer Institute. We can promise you a lot of great workshops, a lot of research. We don't have snow there, no. No. Okay. No snow, no rain, no wind, but yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that gives us some time for questions. So thank you very much. So you have basically two networks, and if you look at them from the point of view of graph theory, how different they are. Because I think that if you look at the, a number of components of connectivity and especially with a strong connectivity and then the density of the network, if they are different, the results can very much depend on these characteristics. Maybe just to comment a little bit, because if you look at the network, they can be, because we have directed graph, different characteristics, and these characteristics can pretty much influence the results, especially on centrality measures.
That is true. That's why, thank you, that's a great comment. So that is why we actually wanted to support those descriptive analysis in terms of measuring centrality and comparing to learning outcome. That's why I wanted to bring statistical network analysis to see what are actually those processes that drive network formation. In terms of density, they're quite similar. I think we talk about it in the paper, but that's what we wanted to assess with network analysis. That's why we introduced exponential graph models to see actually what are those the dynamics that influence the development of certain patterns. So what actually affects the certain configuration of the network. So that's why we actually extended with statistical network analysis. So, yeah, I hope that
coming to you, Leah.
We can definitely continue. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Srećko, this is really just a suggestion. I really enjoyed your talk, and now I have to go and read the paper. And your concluding points at the end and what you've just been explaining makes me just want to offer that there is a whole literature, and you might be familiar with it already, that brings together people who work on the impact of culture and communication patterns on technology use, or culture on communication and technology on culture. And I think there might be some useful theory and perhaps empirical models in that literature that might help inform some of these differences and explorations. It would be really interesting. I'd be happy to talk to you.
Thank you.
About that.
Yes, please. You can.
Yes.
Hi. Since you're analyzing a discussion forum, I assume that you will have several disconnected components. How do you handle this in the centrality measures, especially with respect to closeness? Closeness is only defined on connected graphs.
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. We observed two different configurations initially. So we wanted to observe just those strongly connected components, the largest connected components in the graph, and we also wanted to see what's the difference in terms of the whole network. Basically, most of those studies that I reference here, and there are actually two approaches. One is to observe the whole network, and the other one is probably, as you're suggesting, to focus on those largely connected components. Here, we wanted to observe the whole network in both settings, because we wanted to have like same settings in both situations, and we tried with large connected components, but the results are pretty much similar. But I would like to discuss that further, definitely. Thanks. Thank you.
We have a couple more minutes, so I'll bring this around to you. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. A question on, I noticed you didn't use eigenvector centrality to look at the interactions. Was that a nature of the type of communications that were taking place? Because I would have thought that would have been an important dimension.
That's true. Thank you. That's also important concept, but we wanted to have basically degree betweenness and closeness are most commonly used in this type of research. So I agree, eigenvalues definitely, we just didn't analyze eigenvalue centrality, but probably we will do in further research. Because we know it's important, we did in some other studies, but here we just wanted to focus on what Freeman said, and he said degree centrality. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, last question. Shorter one, maybe? Great, thank you. And then our next speaker, we have a few minutes between, so.
Okay, thank you for the talk. So people that are central in the network are those that are active. Do you think the actual network is giving you anything beyond just looking for activeness of people? If we just leave the whole network aside and look who's been more active, do you think we get less out of that, or was there any experiments that were done on that to see if it's the actual network which is helping?
Sorry, could you say it? I didn't.
Right. So if we have someone central in the network, that means they've also been very active in the course, right?
Yeah.
So if I just leave all the network aside and look for activeness, how much people have engaged with the course, has there been anything to see whether these people that are generally active in class, regardless of where they stand in the network, are those that are doing better performance or not?
That was the point of these two different analyses. So basically, in one of the courses, those who were central in the network, who were more active, actually had better chances to obtain a certificate. In terms of the other network, there was nothing significant. So even they were in central network or not, it didn't matter. So that's why I want to continue this analysis with to add some kind of content analysis or linguistic analysis to see what's actually the nature of contribution of these different individuals who are either central or not in different settings. And so, yeah, that's part of the countries. Thank you.
Okay, let's thank Srećko again for his work.